All right, everybody, welcome to the Alley Oop. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate all the love and support on the podcast so far. If you can, it'd be awesome if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the program, whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify or Google or wherever you're listening. Would be awesome if you could leave that positive review to help us grow the show. On this episode, I've got a very special guest, Brandon Duenas, who covers the Phoenix Suns for us. He's at AZ Sports Zone on Twitter. Does a fantastic job covering the Suns for various platforms, including Bright Side of the Sun, and he has been tremendous for us. So, going to be chatting all about the Suns in the first segment, and then in the second segment, we're chatting about the scariest NBA players to face in the last 25 years. That was a fun discussion, a fun trip down memory lane, and kind of a nice reprieve from all the serious basketball discussion. We just wanted to have some fun, and I think that will be a tremendous fun time for you to listen to. So make sure to tune in, make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you ask me the best possible way to support my work, that is probably it. Subscribing to the channel, watching some of those videos, doing a great job over there, cutting up some clips and doing different things. It has been awesome and a really interesting experience to try to get into. So if you enjoy NBA video content, go follow the Alley Oop with Ryan Blackburn. All right, without further ado, here is the alley-oop.
Run, 2-on-1, Green to finish. Wow, the alley-oop. Turn the corner, inside! He made Jusuf Nurkic a screensaver. Here comes Murray, alley-oop to Gordon. Oh, what a play!
All right, joined now by Brandon Duenas, who runs AZ Sports Zone for Phoenix. Thank you so much covering the Suns for us here on the Alley-Oop. Really appreciate you taking the time. You said it was a pretty busy day heading into this Monday. I know the Suns have been pretty busy lately.
Yeah, no, it's been a chaotic day for me work-wise, and obviously all the Suns things going on, and it's the grind never stops in the NBA. So definitely excited to jump on here and give some updates. Because a lot's changed just from the last time we recorded.
Grind never stops. It's going to be one of my questions actually about just how your opinions have changed, maybe how things have changed for the Suns, and because I remember the last time we talked about this team and Bradley Beal and Devin Booker and Kevin Durant were all playing. They were all scoring a bunch of points in the preseason, and things were feeling good. That you could see the vision. And so far this season, the Suns 3-4 record. Kevin Durant's averaging over 35 minutes a game and played all 7 games. Devin Booker's only played 2. Bradley Beal's played 0. What's going on? Like, I think I'm most curious, just like talking to somebody who actually might know, why is this taking so long for the Beal debut?
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, it's not the start a lot of people envisioned, especially at the preseason where it looked like we saw in a very limited sample just kind of a quick vision of what it's going to look like, and then all of a sudden, Booker has an injury that kind of appears out of nowhere. Beal has one that appears out of nowhere right before the season begins. Did they rush Booker back? Possibly. I think the fact that he's had 2 separate injuries in that same area kind of speaks to that, just overcompensating. And then with the Beal situation, it just seems to me like they're trying to be overly cautious. It is November, so that's the one thing. Like in general, I see a lot of people with like very strong takes one way or the other. I try to kind of be level-headed on this. Like, not your season's not going to be like, it's not make or break in November. So that's the one thing for me is like, just get these guys healthy. Obviously they've had a couple losses that were right in their hands. Like they could very easily be sitting here with like 5 or 6 wins, but instead, they're still down 2 guys and it seems like the sky is falling if you're on Suns Twitter right now. And I feel like I'm the voice of reason here, where it's like, we still have to see them. Like it's more of a if than when at this point. But if we get to see these 3 together, that's when you can really start to make your judgment of what they're going to look like come playoff time. But until then, it's just a bunch of hypotheticals, really.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Clippers and the Nets, they've gotten labeled as the greatest hypothetical teams of all time. But if we never ever get to see Bradley Beal play, then that moniker might change here. Like you said, though, it seems like it's very cautious. They are going to take their time with it. Not going to be something that you stress about in the early months of the season. Although it does, like you said, it feels like Suns fans are getting a little antsy. Are there any positive words of affirmation that you can offer to them in this difficult time?
Yes, a couple of things. Beal is definitely getting closer. Just for those that are not following the Suns as closely, like he had an intense workout before that Philly game. There's a chance he was going to play on Wednesday, but now it's looking like Friday's kind of the target date that we're getting. So he is getting closer. Booker, I have no idea what's going on with that situation at this point, but I would imagine they'd be more cautious. But my optimistic side is the year they made the finals in 2021, they started the season 8-8. And the year that the Mavericks blew them out in the second round, they didn't lose in November. So I don't think November really, like early season, doesn't really have any correlation. Obviously, you want to see them play and get those reps. I think it's important. I'm not trying to belittle that. And I think seeding is very important too. Like you don't want to face Denver in the second round. And you want to try to get as high of a seed as you can to avoid some like unfavorable playoff matchups. But at the same time, like I'm not going to get too worried about a slow start, as long as we could just get to see that big three. Because like you said, if we never get to see it, then it's just gonna, that'd be the most Suns thing ever, and we would never live it down. So hopefully in the near future, Shams just said like 7 to 10 days is kind of the timeline for Booker and Beal to both return. So we'll see.
Well, it's a good thing that the Suns have never had any injury issues in their franchise history. Like ever when it comes to the playoffs. Just never had anything go wrong with the injury issues.
Yep. No hip checks either. Nothing. Like there's
nothing there. But hey, I mean, positive vibes hopefully from Shams. So you get a week, maybe 10 days of waiting to see those guys come back, and once they do come back, I think people still have faith in this group being really, really talented, really, really good. I was really impressed with the defense at the beginning of the year, just those first couple of games. Things have kind of fallen by the wayside, and I think that Spurs back to back, not back, but like 2 games in a row, was kind of a watershed moment in terms of how far this team has to go on the defensive end. How do you think they have handled the early season adversity in your mind?
I think they've done a pretty decent job, all things considered. Like the role players are doing their job. It's just a matter of like they're being asked to do a lot without two of the engines of your offense. Like these guys, once the vision when they constructed this team is that Beal and Booker are going to kind of alternate a lot of the playmaking. Durant could do a little bit. Nurkic could pass from the top of the key. So I think once they're in their actual roles they're meant to be in, it's going to look a lot cleaner. And I think that's kind of why some of their struggles have been, guys in expanded roles. Like Eric Gordon's looked great every other game. Grayson Allen, same thing. But you can't rely on these guys to night in, night out be that number 2 option, and that puts a lot of stress on Durant. So overall, though, I think their defensive identity, like they've shown some flashes. Like Jordan Goodwin's been impressive. Josh Okogie's everywhere, like at all times. Like that guy's just a ball of energy, and I've really liked what I've seen from Drew Eubanks too. Like those 3 kind of just have built that defensive identity of just playing hard. And those are types of role players you're going to need around your big 3 that do the dirty work. So I've liked what I've seen from them. And, Utah's had some nice flashes too. But again, like I said, you can't rely on these guys too much. And that's why I'm not going to jump to too many conclusions till we see what they look like alongside Beal and Booker and Durant, because I think that's when they're really going to flourish, when there's really no pressure on them to be great, and they could just have a decent game, hit wide open shots, and your life is a lot easier instead of having to shoot 20 shots age 35 for Eric Gordon.
Yeah, it's a large burden to bear at this early stage of the season. Grayson Allen's been taking some extra shots, and Josh Okogie has had some pressure on him. Like these guys they're doing their best. They're trying, and I don't really blame them for the way that things have kind of gone. But got a nice win against Detroit on Sunday, and I know people are gonna kind of laugh when I say that, but Detroit has actually been pretty good. Like they've been fine, especially at the beginning of the season with Cade Cunningham. That was a fun battle to watch. KD scores 41. It looks like he hasn't missed a step at all. He looks pretty good. He looks the same. Plus 29 in the 250 Kevin Durant minutes this season, minus 18 in the 86 non-KD minutes. I do want to point out that is not enough non-KD minutes. Like the dude is playing a lot right now in this early portion of the year, and he's just not. This isn't 2013 anymore. Like he has got to find some opportunities to rest. And I know that Frank Vogel's really put into vice right now because not having the other two stars, you got to rely on the big guy. But I hope that they can figure it out. Minus 18 in 86 minutes, that's not that bad. And I'm actually relatively impressed with the way that they've handled that.
Yeah, and it feels worse, honestly. It feels like when he's off the court, they have no chance. But they have had some stretches where they've looked competent without him. But I think that the key is there's times where some of these role players will kind of revert back to. It looks like they're almost like looking for permission to do stuff whenever like Durant's out there, whereas whenever he's not, sometimes they're a little more aggressive. I think that aggression just has to continue when he's out there, and that'll take some pressure off Durant because, like you said, it's a lot to put on a 36-year-old to, especially this early in the season. It's definitely not something I think that they drew up. It's just kind of a game by game basis, and we saw that fourth quarter against the Lakers. That was one of the ugliest quarters of basketball I've ever seen in my life. And between that and then the way they collapsed against the Spurs, like those are just two very winnable games that could come back to bite them down the road. But it shows that even despite that, they're not really getting blown out by teams. And like the Spurs had a pretty big lead in that second game, and they came back and made a game out of that too. But at the same time, it's probably not a good thing if you're trying to fight back this early in the season and putting heavy workloads on your stars, because it's a marathon. You can't get someone like Durant, too many miles before the playoffs start, because they're going to need every bit of him they can get.
You mentioned the Spurs. We're going to mention Victor Wembanyama later in the show. I have a feeling that
Yep.
he's going to come up in our initial discussion on the scariest players in the NBA to face. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to go check out that video tomorrow. But we have a lot of exciting things to talk about with the Suns still. One not so exciting thing is Jusuf Nurkic. I think that there are some good moments with Nurk where he's passing at the high post, where he's running the offense a little bit. He's trying to make things easier for the other guys, namely Durant, where Durant, you don't have to just put him in the mid post every time. Like, at least try to free him up for a look every now and then. And that would be fantastic. And Nurkic does that. But we do need to talk about Jusuf Nurkic from the standpoint of him not being so great, especially on the defensive end, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's, like you said, there's moments where you kind of see the vision and you're like, I get it. Like he looks great one game, and then Suns fans are like talking themselves into him. And then the next game, you're just like, all right, how's this going to work in the playoffs? So it's very much up and down with him. And I think a lot of what I've kind of my initial fears in that trade, like I said it right away, that I think it's just looking from a playoff construction standpoint. Like he's not someone that you're going to be able to count on in your rotation. Like I think he'll probably play in the playoffs just by necessity at this point, but that's not very encouraging. Like I think Eubanks is going to be a factor, but overall, I think the center thing, like they're going to have to figure out. I think they need another body in there. You're not really going to be able to make a splash at this point. You don't have the assets for that, so it's just going to have to be someone that gives them a different look and can survive defensively. And I think playing Durant at the 5 in the playoffs could be one area that they look to explore too, just from a matchup standpoint. You don't want to do that during the regular season though, because you're already asking so much from him from a wear and tear standpoint. But in certain matchups, like going small, might be their best option, just to give them a death offensive lineup and just, if the defense is going to suck anyways, like, we can survive on that end with, just having some more shooting and spacing out there.
I know it's unfair. Do you think that this team would be 3-4 if DeAndre Ayton was still on the team?
Ooh, that's tough. I'm not sure their record changes, honestly. Like if you look at what I think they'd be better defensively in the sense, but their numbers are pretty. I saw a side by side earlier today, and they're pretty similar. Like Nurkic has an edge on some offensive stuff, and Ayton's obviously been a better defender and rebounder. But I'm not sure it really makes a huge difference. Maybe they have an extra win, but possible to tell, really.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where I think the Suns, obviously, they made the bet that if we bolster the rotation in this number of ways, we'll have plenty of other, or at least a number of other options to go to in a playoff series where Ayton isn't going to make enough of a difference by himself. And I don't know if that's not true. I don't know if that's true. I know what Jusuf Nurkic is doing right now, and I know that Drew Eubanks is as comparable of an option in terms of,
Yep.
man, there are some things that he can do way better than Nurkic, and there are some things that he'll do a little bit worse. But I'm still, when that trade initially happened, I was blown away. Like I was blown away that they went in that direction, and I understand why they did it now. I still don't believe in it. I still believe in DeAndre Ayton a little bit more, and I know that Suns fans aren't going to want to hear about it. They're not going to want to hear that at all. But yeah, I don't believe in Nurkic specifically. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of Suns fans are kind of in agreement with you, but it was just the relationship part that would just seem like the bridge was just burned to the point where we just kind of had to cut ties. That's ultimately what it felt like, at least. And I think Grayson Allen was also a big part of that trade, where especially now with Booker and Beal missing time, like that's another thing to factor in, and like what they'd look like if they didn't make that deal, because that it helps improve their depth. And I think Allen could play some playoff minutes. I'm not sure if he's a lock to be a playoff guy yet, but he's definitely looked, he's had some flashes where he's looked really good. And I think he'll look better alongside Booker and Beal. So that's another part of the trade that I think is a little bit underrated, but at the same time, I agree. I think Ayton defensively, especially in a playoff setting, just made a lot more sense than Nurkic. And I said it from the start, I was not a fan of the trade. And then I started talking myself into Nurkic a little bit, and then now I'm kind of walking myself back off that. So it's just going to be a roller coaster of emotions, I'm sure, throughout the season.
We have breaking news as we are currently recording this podcast. Portland Trailblazer center Robert Williams is facing potential season-ending surgery on his knee. He could also go with a cleanup for 2 to 3 months from now, and be out for 2 to 3 months and then try to come back. But he might be out for the season. That's a guy that I had talked about. I talked myself into kind of as a Phoenix Suns trade target down the line. Just say, hey, can we find matching salary for a different center option that might fit even a little bit better than Nurkic? So that's a completely separate topic, completely separate thing. We'll probably revisit this kind of topic when the trade deadline gets a little bit closer. But I do think that there will be some other names that get thrown out there when it comes to Phoenix Suns center trade targets. Because while you did mention going Kevin Durant at the 5, there is, I think, there should be some hesitancy, especially in a matchup against the Nuggets. But more so putting those extra miles on KD. You don't want to do that in the regular season at all, if at all possible.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, no doubt. Okay, I think center is definitely sorry. I was just going to say, I think that's definitely something down the road that will 100% pop up at the trade deadline. They'll probably be active. So that's a good call. Williams would have been great. So check that one off.
Yeah, it's too bad. That dude has been he's been cursed by bad knees. Okay. Which of the non-primary starters have surprised you the most? Which of them have disappointed you the most?
I would say at this point, it's tough because it's almost like a rotating door of like being impressed by one guy and then the next day he kind of lets you down a little bit. But I would say, I think Eubanks, I'm a believer in terms of just he hasn't done anything like out of the like anything extraordinary, I would say at this point. But he looks playable. He plays very hard. His rim protection's been awesome. He contests everything. Like he just plays really hard, and that's a dude that I think could end up closing out, like bearing like a trade for another center. Like I think he could be their guy that closes out games over Nurkic, especially come playoff time. So he's the first name that kind of pops up. Disappointing, Keita Bates-Diop. Like he had one really impressive game where he kind of looked like maybe he's going to get back on track. They put him in the starting lineup, which I kind of like Vogel's willingness to experiment, like based on what's in front of him. That was one thing Monty did not do a lot of. He's kind of stubborn and would stick with what he believed in. Vogel's already kind of mixed and matched the lineups, but overall Bates-Diop's been a little bit of a disappointment just based off the preseason hype, because I remember a lot of Suns fans were saying this dude was a lock as a fifth starter. He was the best signing of the offseason. Like Hollinger and a few other like reporters were just hyping it up too. So just relative to public expectation, I would say Bates-Diop's been the most disappointing, but he's also shown a couple of flashes that I think he could definitely be a contributor. It's just a matter of getting consistent at this point.
Yeah, it's completely fair. That's I think the problem with signing a bunch of minimum guys in general is just that is the rotating door of production. That is kind of what you sign up for in that particular case. And
Yep.
it has to be kind of built into the expectations for these guys. And hopefully one of them or two of them kind of pop by the end of the year. That was always the vision, but early returns, not necessarily great for Bates Diop, obviously. Eubanks, see what happens. And then maybe he's a guy that can close out a playoff game. But yeah, that should be interesting to track. Yuta Watanabe is obviously somebody who's hyped up a little bit. Eric Gordon is obviously, like, I don't even count him like in this particular discussion because he's kind of elevated above that, I'd say. Like he's going to be in the rotation pretty much every night.
Yeah, that's why I excluded him too. Is like you kind of know what he is at this point, and like he just had a great game against Detroit, 21-8-5 with only one turnover, like playing a lot of point. So he's definitely a part of their playoff rotation. So I'll take that, but everything else is kind of a mystery box.
Final question here on the Suns. Wednesday night, they'll face the Chicago Bulls on the road. Friday night, though, in-season tournament matchup against the Los Angeles Lakers. Just your general impressions of the tournament so far and that kind of matchup.
Well, the courts are definitely courts. We'll say that. I mean, they're very interesting. Overall, like I was like okay, just to rewind the clock a little bit, just going back to the play-in tournament, I was a huge fan of that. I thought that was a great idea, a great addition. Like I'm all about being innovative and everything. The in-season tournament, I just can't get sold on. Maybe I have to experience it. Like with the Suns, it just feels like a money grab to me. Like I'm not really too thrilled about it as like some people are, but you know what? Like if things start to get crazy and like we get some awesome finishes, like then I'm sure I'll change my mind. So I'm open to being changed on that, but at this point I'm just kind of like, it just feels like another regular season game. Like I'm not going to put too much stock into it. I'm sure, with the money stakes involved too, like there's gonna be a little bit more competitive juices flowing, but so that part of it's nice, but overall, yeah, I think these next two games, like especially if Booker and Beal aren't back, it's going to be tough for any Suns fans to get too invested, I would say. But if Beal returns and it's the Lakers and like on a Friday night, can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an epic matchup. That's one that everybody's going to want to tune into, obviously. So keep an eye out for that one, Suns and NBA fans. No, I think it's going to be fascinating. There's no NBA games tonight when you're listening to this on Election Day, but it should be kind of fun to track on Tuesdays and Fridays specifically. That's the easiest way to distinguish. Like Tuesdays and Fridays in November, those are when the in-season tournaments are happening, or when the in-season tournament games are happening. And if you need a reminder, you can have your retinas kind of burned in by the courts that are out there and the jerseys that they're putting on. So there's a lot of easy ways to go about it. But you think the Suns are basically eliminated from tournament contention if Booker and Beal aren't back?
I don't know. Like I think it just depends how. I like that Lakers game without Booker and Beal, like they took them down to the wire and like they didn't scored like 3 points in the fourth quarter I think it was like 6. It was what it ended up being, but they had a really rough stretch. So if they can just figure out how to shoot the ball and like they're at home, like I think they could win that game and maybe build some momentum. But it's gonna like I said before, it's gonna be tough without those guys. If other teams are really turning it up a notch too, like for the tournament, then I don't know. We'll see. I'm very interested to see like how the Suns treat it as well. It's all fast. It's new. Like no one really knows what to expect. We'll just kind of play it by ear and see how things go.
Well, we will see what happens. He is Brandon Duenas, who is covering the Phoenix Suns for AZ Sports Zone and host of the Locked On Suns. Thank you so much. You also do Bright Side of the Sun, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Correct. Sorry. Also does Bright Side of the Sun, which is a fantastic SB Nation site. Make sure to go track all of his work over there. Thank you, Brandon, for hopping on. And once again, good luck for the rest of the season. We'll chat in just a bit about the scariest players in the NBA. Really excited about this upcoming discussion. I wanted to have some fun here. I wanted to have some fun with you. So I kind of pitched this topic to you. I pitched this idea. I wanted to talk about the scariest players to face in the NBA because you and the Phoenix Suns just saw Victor Wembanyama and just saw the San Antonio Spurs this past week. And I thought that was such an interesting matchup. It's such an interesting back-to-back. Just really quickly, your takeaways from facing Wemby and the Wemby experience.
It was unreal. I've never seen anything like it, especially from a rookie. Just seeing someone dwarf Kevin Durant is just hysterical and terrifying at the same time. So some of the stuff he was doing was just like, it feels like he's a 2K creative player where you turned all the sliders up, made him as tall as possible, and just made him unstoppable. Like that's what he literally feels like. And the fact that this is a rookie doing this is crazy. And of course, it's the Spurs that luck into it again. Like it's crazy. that part is for another discussion. But yeah, no, that performance alone just makes me want to include him on this list already. Like that's how crazy it was.
It is funny. Like, there's no way I could imagine him on Charlotte now. There's no way I could imagine him on Portland. Like, it's just not a thing. Like, he feels like the next iteration of the dominant San Antonio Spurs franchise, where you go from David Robinson to Tim Duncan and out of Victor Wembanyama. Like, it feels right, which might just make it wrong.
Exactly. No, that's the best way to put it, for sure.
It's been good, and he deserves a spot, or at least an honorable mention on this list. Only played 7 games, so I don't think we could throw him on there just yet. But I wanted to go through this with you. I wanted to, basically over the last 25 years or so, I want to talk about the scariest players in the NBA to face. And when basically how I framed this, these are the players that you never want to see come to town because they're going to give your team hell every single time. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. It's going to be an absolute challenge and just a chore to face them because they are so dominant and so good. So I have a list of guys here, but I figured I'd give you the floor. Is there somebody that came to mind first for you in this conversation?
Yeah, I think the immediate one, and this one's a little bit obvious just from a pure dominance perspective, is Shaquille O'Neal. Like, I just think there's nothing like, I don't think there's ever really going to be anything like him again. Like, just how his presence and just the way he commanded the ball, and just like there's nothing you could do about it. Maybe besides send him to the free throw line. That's about it. But yeah, to me, he's the first one that pops up when I think of just pure dominance. And I don't know if you agree with that, but I just think it's tough to think of someone that was more dominant just from a presence standpoint.
He was the first guy on my list, man. Like, that's kind of when I think of scary players, dominant players that you are worried when they come to the arena, it's got to start with Shaq, because he's a guy that they literally changed the rules for, that you had to have 3 centers on your roster in order to guard him. And teams changed their entire game plans around just so that they could deal with this absolute monstrosity in the middle of the floor. It was unbelievable to watch and unbelievable to kind of experience firsthand. But he's the first guy that came to mind for me.
Nice. Good to hear. Another one, I would say I'll just stick with the bigs here for a little bit, is Tim Duncan, especially being a Suns fan. Like, this dude would just have a stone cold look on his face and look almost bored, and he would rip your team's soul out at the same time. So he was just, it wasn't as flashy. It was never flashy. It was just kind of like death by a million cuts. It just felt like it was never ending, and he would just chip away at you all game. And to me, I think he's just on an all-time list perspective. I think he's the most underrated player of all time. Like, just his resume speaks for itself. Obviously, he was on a great Spurs team, a dynasty that people aren't going to forget anytime soon. But I'd really think that he should be talked about in the same breath as Kobe. Like, I think he's up there in that, closer to the top 5 than Kobe is. To me, he's just one of the closest players you can get to a GOAT resume without being in that initial top 5.
Yeah, I mean, he's tremendous. He's actually not the guy that came to mind for me with this. And I think defining it as scary players and the guys that you're scared of individually, I honestly associate him so much with the Spurs and so much with just that ethos, as opposed to the individual side of things, where That's think fair, he didn't come to mind as much for me in that regard. But I mean, that's an omission on my part, obviously. He was, of course, dominant. He was, of course, fantastic. And having anybody else that I have in my honorable mentions over him on this list would be a travesty. So I'm with you on that. Like the next guy on my list I had was Kobe Bryant. So like
Yeah.
I completely understand, and like I can completely understand kind of the juxtaposition between those two guys, where Kobe, it was like fear. Tim Duncan, it almost felt like you're resolved to the situation, you know?
Exactly. And especially being a Suns fan, probably, I mean, both those guys, like we had some heated battles against both those teams back in the 7-second or less days. And Duncan especially really just sent those teams home early. And Kobe, he's definitely on my list as well. I think it's kind of a no-brainer with this. Just, you know, the Mamba mentality, right? Like he's coming to your building. He wants to put on a show and go at, you know, the best player and make an impression right away. So I think from that alone, yeah, just him. And then Kevin Garnett was another guy that has kind of that same mentality. And KG's on my list as well. He's someone that I think is also a little bit underrated on the all-time thing, and just the attitude that he would play with, like that was it felt almost infectious to wherever he went. And like that dude was talking, he was a psycho. And you know, those are the types of players I think kind of opposite of Tim Duncan, but they definitely have that mentality of, you know, they're coming to your city and they're not trying to leave with a loss. That's for sure.
Who would you be more scared to face in a regular season setting? Would it be Kevin Garnett or Dirk Nowitzki?
Ooh, regular season setting, I would say Dirk. Because I just feel like that dude would just get hot, and once, I mean, there's nothing you could do about his shot whenever he gets going. In a playoff setting, I would say KG.
Yeah, he's just one of those guys that, especially in kind of the modern aspect of things, learning about how the modern NBA has really evolved. Dirk obviously would be tremendous in the modern NBA too.
Yep.
But there's just a different level of it with KG, where he is like a Giannis, like Embiid hybrid in terms of what you're expecting from a guy like that. So I love KG as well. It's funny, my guy Swipa, he and I did a top 20 all-time list over the offseason with MHS, and we got into it. Like I had Dirk on higher than him on KG on that list, and those are two all-time greats, obviously, but two guys that on this list, I think I'd go with Dirk, just in terms of the more scary guy, just because there's nothing you can do about the shot.
Yep. No, I'm right there with you. And I mean, there's so many bigs that I think could kind of fit that mold. Like even like Jokic for me, like he has to be up there too. I know. Are you focusing more on? You want to focus more on like outside of this era, though, correct?
Oh no, I think we could go with this era too. I think it makes it fun, makes it interesting. Would you include Jokic in this list?
Oh, absolutely. And it's kind of similar in the breadth of Tim Duncan, where he may not be that physically scary guy that's like a psychopath in terms of like a Kobe Bryant or Kevin Garnett, but you just know what you're going to get every single night. And to me, that's why you have to include him, because, you know, he just tears you apart and it's just so effortless too. That's the scary part. So it's like those stone cold killers like Duncan and Jokic that show no emotion almost at times. Like, not to say he doesn't show emotion, because he does, but just compared to some of these other guys, like that's what makes it more almost like intimidating, I think, just from a game by game basis.
Yeah, I know that there were, like, I cover Jokic obviously very closely for those that don't know. Like he's awesome to watch. He is in control the entire time when he's out there. And I think it reminds me a lot of LeBron James in that manner, where you just know that when he comes to town, you know that he's going to be in control of the game. Like it's going to be played at his pace. It's going to be played with the passes in mind that he wants to make, with the shots in mind that he wants to take. And there's just nothing that the opposing team can really do about it. They could force the ball to somebody else, but most of the time that's because that guy is wide open. So it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. Jokic is awesome. I mentioned LeBron. He has to be on this list as well.
Okay.
He's not the first guy that I listed, though. I had listed Shaq first, and I think I'd keep it as Shaq first, just in terms of scariest guys to face. I don't know if that's fair. I don't. But it's just when you think about your actual level of fear, when guys come into the league and when they're coming into your building, how you're going to deal with it. I think I am more afraid of Shaq in that regard, but maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's because I'm already resigned to LeBron just like throughout his career, just dominating no matter what.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think a lot of us kind of almost take what LeBron does for granted in a sense. Like, because I remember even myself, like I went back and watched like an old just Miami Heat LeBron highlight tape, and I'm just like, good Lord. Like, and he's still running strong. Like, it's some of the stuff he does is just crazy. So I think it's almost like, I don't want to say take it for granted, but it's like we're so used to it that I think once he hangs it up, we'll probably appreciate it a lot more, because he's definitely, especially at his peak, there is no one like him really. Like, it's just some of the stuff he does is just nuts. So definitely on my list as well. But yeah, him and Shaq are definitely two of my top 5 guys for sure, and for different reasons.
Yeah, completely different players and completely different attitudes when it comes to how to dominate a game. A guy you're very familiar with, Kevin Durant. He's going to be on this list for me. Stephen Curry going to be on this list for me.
Yep.
A little bit more modernized in terms of the actual shooting aspect of things and getting to spots on the perimeter and hitting threes. But KD's still a mid-range assassin, as you're very well aware. What is it about his game that makes it so scary to face?
I think just having a guard skill set at his size and release point, you could try to get as physical as you want with him. Sometimes it can bother him, but ultimately he's still going to get a shot off. He's going to get where he wants to get. And it's kind of like Jokic, right? Like, you're not going to block his shot, especially he has smaller dudes than Jokic guarding him because of how quick he is and how he can make you pay if you put a bigger dude on him that's not as quick. So I think that combination of just size and handle at his size is like one of the first, like, he's just a freak. Like, we've never really seen anything like that. And now you're starting to see, like, Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren and like some of these guys, this next wave where it's almost getting normalized. But it's definitely not normal. So I think that's the best way to put it.
No, it's fair. That is a completely fair statement. Like, it makes those guys freaks too. Like, that's
Yeah.
really where we're at. No, we should definitely mention Steph on this. There's nobody, I think, in league history that you've been more scared to see when they cross half court with the basketball. Like, you just have to be accounting for that at all times. And there's a list that the NBA GM survey does where it basically is like a similar question to this one. And Steph, he's obviously at the top of that for so many years, basically ever since winning his first MVP award. And he's been going strong ever since. Like, that dude, he's the guy that, of the modern era, I mean, he's the guy that you just know you're going to probably walk out of there with an L. Like, even whether he's the guy who is shooting or whether he's the guy that's creating the open shot because you've sent 2 to him and there's a wide open guy underneath the basket. Like, it is difficult to deal with, and he is a difficult player to deal with too.
Yeah, for sure. And the gravity that comes with him, it's not just about his ability to hit, 30, 40-foot bombs. Like, you have to worry about that too, but just being the primary focus of the defense, and it still doesn't really matter. Like, it's just, and the spacing he opens up for everyone else, like, it really changed the game. Like, you look at the jump and 3-point shooting and just the value in it, and it feels like he kind of started that movement. And there's some guys that I think could have been on this list, like a Ray Allen. If he played in this era, I think he would have been perfect for it. Like, he barely missed out. If he was born 15 years later, he would have been, I think, probably in that same range, honestly, because he's more athletic than Steph is and a little bit taller. So I think someone like him playing in today's game, like, he's someone that could have made that cut for me. But yeah, Steph truly revolutionized the game. Not to get too off topic, I think he's definitely deserves to be on this list.
No, for sure. He's the greatest shooter ever. Like, that's probably a good definition when talking about scariest players to face in the league.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Any other guys that really stick out on your list?
So these are more like honorable mentions. I feel like, and this is just at his peak, this is a dude that I think he didn't live up to like what I think he could have been. But when he was at his peak and he got on a heater, like, you knew you're in trouble. Tracy McGrady, like, that dude Like injuries kind of derailed him a little bit, but like at his peak, I think he was one of the most gifted scorers. Allen Iverson's another guy that I think also you knew exactly what he was going to do, and it didn't really matter. He would just dissect every defense, and at 6'1", maybe. It's just crazy that he was as dominant as he was. Obviously, it's not completely different dynamic than like a Shaquille O'Neal, where it's a 7-foot monster you're dealing with, but he would still just be as dominant and single-handedly kind of led the Sixers to a title, or not a title, but making the championship. So those are a couple guys I just felt like I should include. And then the Pistons with like, Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, Tayshaun Prince, Chauncey, and Rip. Like I couldn't just pick one of them, but like just that team, just to kind of like what you said with the Spurs, where they're just kind of, you remember them as a unit.
The scariest team to face in the NBA, where if you face them, you're probably scoring 65 that night. That's a tough one to go up against. Like that, can you imagine like having to score? Like I know modern offenses have definitely improved, but like those are top 5 defenders at each of their respective positions in the NBA.
Yeah.
Like there was no gap, there was no weakness. There were all like these guys were tremendous, and Ben Wallace in particular, like he's very underrated by modern standards. Like didn't make the All-Star teams that probably could have. Didn't make like he does have the Defensive Player of the Years, but for some reason it feels like Defensive Player of the Year, just in the grand scheme of things, is not as valued in modern discourse. I guess that's probably because Rudy Gobert has been winning them. Sorry, another scary Stifle Tower to face in the NBA. No, I wanted to. Like that, those are good names. I'll throw out Dwayne Wade as another name that shouldn't be missed here. I had several other guys that we could probably go even more modern. We should mention Giannis too. Like
yes, that was my next one I was going to throw in there. I think he's right there as well.
Oh yeah, like I consider him and Jokic kind of having like identical careers to this point, just like different style of players, and where they go from here, I think will kind of differentiate between who would you rather have all time, but right now it could be either of them. But I mean, Giannis, like watching him go in transition, there's really nothing like it in the NBA right now, or like has been for a while. So like he is even more of a freight train than somebody like LeBron was, which I mean says something. That's crazy. Who else? I've got Kawhi Leonard, Damian Lillard, Joel Embiid, Luka Doncic. Any of those guys tickle the fancy?
Yeah, I think pretty much all the guys you listed there were on the rest of my list. I'll throw in Vince Carter. I think also at his peak was a force, and just how athletic he was. Like it was more of showtime than it was like dominance. Like Dwayne Wade was another guy that you mentioned earlier that I think definitely, if we're talking about peaks, like that dude's peak was among one of the best we've ever seen at the shooting guard position. So I think he's definitely, at the very least, an honorable mention. He's kind of right on the brink there. But yeah, overall, I think Giannis was like pretty much the last modern NBA guy I would throw on here. And Kawhi, obviously, was a robot, like absolute freak. And, he still is. But I mean, just at his peak in Toronto and the things he did with the Spurs, like it was not fair.
Did we mention Harden?
We did not. No, that's a good one. That's
I think I was going back through.
Depends how you look at it. Yeah,
you're right. Exactly. Like you're not necessarily fearing him in the playoffs, but I went back through the list, and God, he averaged 36 points per game in 2019. Like that is closer to 40 than 30. Like which is I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before, and we may not see it again, but. No, he should probably get it. We'll give him a tiny mention in there. If I had to pick 5 names for the most dominant players of like the scariest players to face of all time, I'd probably go Shaq, Kobe, LeBron, Steph. I don't think I could. Can I put Jokic on there, or am I going to be biased for putting Jokic on there?
Let's pretend you'll be biased. So you gotta choose a 5th.
Okay, I'll be biased, and so I won't pick Jokic. Let's put KD up there. Let's put KD. So You got Shaq, Kobe, LeBron, KD, and Steph. Those are the five that I think are, of the last 25 years, the scariest to face all time.
Yeah, that's pretty much in alignment with me. I think that fifth spot though, I was that's where I had my four, and those are my top four in a different order, but those are my main four. Outside of that, I think you could throw Jokic, you could throw Giannis, I think Durant's right up there as well. Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm just gonna go out of left field and say Kevin Garnett. Why not?
Hey man, it's completely fair, and we should obviously mention Tim too. We should mention Tim Duncan.
Yes, Tim Duncan. Yeah,
that's maybe he's the perfect fifth guy for this list.
Yep, there we go.
It's just
he's the
I
middle
never
ground.
think of him when I think of scariness. Like is that wrong? Like it's just not going through my brain. So,
yeah,
but it's definitely fun to watch, and it's good to look back on some of these guys as different eras, different styles, different players. But when a lot of teams are scared where those guys are coming into the building.
Yeah. And one more, Manu Ginobili, man. That dude, speaking of the Spurs, I mean, he doesn't fit that scary bill either, but like that dude would tear you apart. Like he was, the way he would slice and dice, and he, kind of invented flopping or made it a little more popular, like kind of changed the game, like we talked about with Harden and Steph to a lesser extent. But I feel like Manu really kind of, I don't want to say invented flopping, because that's not fair, because it's always been around, but really kind of made it a point of emphasis for the league. So anyone that does that, I feel like you could kind of throw in that category.
Perfected the art, if you will.
Yes.
Another guy that we should mention, I want to mention, Zach Randolph in the Grindhouse. It is not like, it's not anywhere close to the level of these other guys, but
Love it.
That's one where I think of, where my mind goes, where I'm like, God, it's going to be hell. It's just going to suck to be in that particular building. And no, they like the grit and grind Grizzlies were always just a nuisance and a pain to face no matter what. And they won way more often than they lost. So I got to give them a shout.
No, that's a good call. I think them and the Pistons are like, those teams are like the last of a dying breed, where maybe we'll see another one like down the road, but probably not with the way the game's trending.
Yeah.
So yeah, those teams I'll always remember fondly.
Well, hey Brandon, it was great to talk to you on this episode. Make sure everybody to go follow his work at AZ Sports Zone on Twitter, and make sure to go check out Bright Side of the Sun, Locked On Suns, and everything in between. Thank you so much for hopping on for this episode. Really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, man. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, that is going to do it for this episode of the Alley Oop with Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you're still listening, it would mean the world if you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever platform you listen to on the audio side of things, if you're listening to this episode. And if you're interested in more video content, once again, go check out that YouTube channel, the Alley Oop with Ryan Blackburn. It is growing, and I'd like for it to continue to grow. The best way for me to continue to monetize my content is to see that YouTube channel grow. So would love to see that happen. It would mean the absolute world for me. The next episode of the podcast will be on Friday. I'm recording with the Southwest Division guys. That is the Dallas Mavericks, Houston Rockets, Memphis Grizzlies, New Orleans Pelicans, and San Antonio Spurs. Really excited for that. Going to be a hell of a time. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Catch you guys on Friday.